What is going on, everyone? Welcome to another fantastic episode of your favorite show on the internet. This is, of course, Fuzzy Dice. Let me turn my music down a little bit. Your Dungeon Master show here on the Exploding Dice channel. Thank you, everyone, for stopping by. We have a great show lined up for you guys. Hopefully you can hear me. It looks like I see my mic levels. Who knows? Sometimes you guys can't hear me. I have a great show lined up for you guys, and we will get right into it. But before we do, let me turn that down. I want to get to some announcements because we do have some stuff to go over, just to get it right out of the way, and let you guys know what's going on. As always, you can see. My camera's flipped again, so you can see right down there is the schedule where you can catch me playing D&D throughout the week. If you guys have been following along, and I hope you have, this coming Thursday at 1 p.m. Eastern is the finale, the final episode of the first season of Reign of Winter on the Encounter Roleplay channel. I've been DMing Reign of Winter for Will, Trainsy TV, and Kira from Subpar Mediocre Gamers. It's been going fantastic, and we wrap up our final episode because there's a dragon and Baba Yaga's hut is in danger, and hopefully you guys will come by and see it. Another is we're not playing Out of the Abyss this Sunday, but we do have a new campaign starting with a brand new cast for the Exploding Dice channel. I hope you guys will all come join us for a new one-shot this Sunday at 8 p.m. It's this same time on Sunday with a new cast, awesome guys, voice actors and entertainers, all of them. And as we start a one-shot to kick off the new season of Exploding Dice. I don't want to keep you guys bored too long because I've got a guest sitting next to me as always. John, go ahead and say hi. Tell everyone who you are and what we're going to be talking about today.
Hey everybody, I'm John Harper. I'm a game designer. We're going to be talking about all kinds of stuff. Some of my games, maybe, and a lot of Dungeon Master / Game Master / Referee / Keeper, Hollyhock God, whatever you want to call yourself. Advice, tips, tricks, etc. All the stuff we love to talk about. We can go on and on and on and on forever about running games. Unfortunately, we only have 2 hours, so we'll have to cram it all in. But it's good to be here. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely, man. I look forward to getting into it. Before we dive into that, though, if you guys have not already, go ahead and hit that retweet link. Dice Thulu is kind enough to provide it to you in chat. You can let your friends know that you were hanging out and watching Fuzzy Dice Show, and they can come join you, and it'll be a grand old time. And if you like the show, please hit that follow button. As you can see below, Serial Comma has already done. Thank you so much, and welcome to the madness.
Good job, Susan.
Yes.
You're leading the pack. Well done.
Set a good example for everyone. You want to see your name down at the bottom, so hit that follow button and keep up with everything we do here. My camera's going out of focus, as it does sometimes. So let's dive right into it. We were talking about this before, as Sniper Serpent has also hit that follow button and joined the madness. Thank you so much, man. No, but as we were talking about before, you can see below I have 2 things listed. Those are obviously not all of the things you've worked on, but I think those are 2 of the more recent ones, the Lasers and Feelings and Blades of the Dark, right?
That's right. Yeah, about as opposite games as you could imagine.
Yeah.
The Lasers and Feelings. I think that was my last free game. I can't remember. It may have been inspired by the Double Clicks song of the same name, and the Double Clicks in general themselves. It's a 1-page game, which is something I used to do a lot of, and my Patreon was initially kind of focused on stuff like that, sort of simple, short, one-shotty kind of free play games. And that one is meant to produce a fairly cheesy one-shot Star Trek-y / space adventure hijinks story. and you roll on some random tables to generate an adventure, and you play it out in a few hours. Then Blades in the Dark, which is my current project, is a big game, a big sprawling kind of thing. At least for me, I mean, I tend to make short projects, so anything that's more than 24 pages is big. Not my biggest game to date. I produced Taos Lanta 4th Edition. If anybody in the chat remembers that game in the early 2000s.
Yeah, I know the name. I don't think I ever got around to reading it though, because
that one was 500 pages.
Yeah.
8.5 by 11. It was a giant project. This one is not going to be that large, but it's still a big project for me, and it's a long-term play. It's sort of the opposite of Lasers and Feelings. It's a very long campaign, a little more rules heavy. It's sort of, if you're familiar with Burning Wheel, it's like on the lighter side of the spectrum from Burning Wheel, but it's in that space in terms of length of play and, kind of a longer-term reward cycle and that sort of thing. And it's a game, just for people who don't know, Blades in the Dark is about a crew of criminals, scoundrels, in a sort of industrial fantasy city that's haunted by ghosts, and you form a crew and you go do heists based on your crew type, your smugglers or your assassins or thieves or whatever.
The concept reminds me, I don't know if you played it, the concept reminds me of an old 3rd edition D&D 3rd edition hack called Thieves World, which
based on Robert Askren's novels,
despite sounding on it, is not anything like Dungeon World.
No. Yeah, Thieves World was a series of books, an anthology of short stories. Robert and Lynn Askren wrote. I think maybe they got some other writers too. And they're definitely playing. Like I was not a fan of Thieves World personally, but it's in that same sandbox of Fritz Leiber and Fafhrd and Grey Mouser and Loncar and then later Looking Glass and Harvey Smith's Thief, video games, and then Harvey's sort of spiritual successor, Dishonored, is all kind of in that ballpark. Blades is very Harvey Smith influenced. Thief. The Thief games and Dishonored are definitely not so much in what you do. They're not stealth. Blades isn't really like a stealth game.
Yeah. But the atmosphere, or at least I can, like when you were describing, I'm like, I remember when Dishonored came out, like that's pretty much how I describe it. So.
Yeah. It's like it's a specific type of fantasy. It's like not the medieval fantasy you typically get with peasants and pets and stuff. It's that kind of like Industrial Revolution thing with steam pipes and coal furnaces and that kind of stuff. So I try to use industrial fantasy as my term for that. But yeah, it's been fun. That was a Kickstarter project last year, and it got a lot of support and enabled me to make the game that I wanted instead of a smaller sort of Spartan version of the game. Kickstarter helped turn it into this much bigger project because it's kind of a one-man thing. I'm doing all the art and everything myself, so it's able me to like pay myself to do those other jobs, which has been really cool. Are
you do you have a background in illustration?
Yeah, I was a graphic designer for 25 years or so, professionally, and sort of retired to be a game designer full time. I've always done game design as a hobby or a part-time job.
Where'd you go to school?
I went to the University of Kentucky originally, and then Seattle Pacific here in Seattle.
Yeah, I studied graphic design and illustration in Manhattan.
Oh, nice. Yeah. I did not go to school for it, I should say. I started doing graphic design when I was very young, and
yeah, I remember. Trust me, I was the same way. I got a laptop.
Yeah, it was always like
Photoshop.
That's right. Yeah, it was like a hobby thing, and I started doing it for money. And then when I went to school, I thought I would be a teacher, so I went down that path. And I did graphic design for my job, but my schooling was headed in the education direction, and then I dropped out because my graphic design job became my career. So I never got a degree in it, but yeah, graphic design and illustration and writing is kind of my background. So.
That's awesome.
There's a little bit of an unfair playing field there in the indie designer space where if you
Oh yeah.
know the graphics tools and you're good at design, like uh, you have one less person to hire
Yeah.
essentially, and
Well, that's
I'm evangelizing those skill sets to my fellow designers who aren't doing that kind of thing, and getting them to just open InDesign, trust me, it's going to be okay. I'll hold your hand, like try it out, and uh, it's
yeah.
been fun to see people like learn those skills.
That's been the same thing. Like when I started streaming, it's like everyone's like, "Oh man, where do I get? I got to get someone to make me graphics and this and that." It's like, I don't know. It's just a thing. I remember I used to say if you weren't able to pirate Photoshop, like there would be no graphic designers. Because that's how everyone got started, is like, acquiring a copy when they were 13 and, just hacking away at it.
Yeah. It's. I mean, I had the same experience. I'm an old man, and we didn't have Photoshop, um, but we had the first tools, and they were pretty cheap. Paint Shop Pro, I think, was like $50 or something, and or there was a shareware version originally for it, I think, and Quark was also, I think there was a shareware version of Quark originally, and PageMaker before it was bought by Adobe was not super expensive, as I recall. I could be wrong about that, but there was this little suite of tools you could get
Yeah.
for kind of a budget, and then in the early days of the web too, my friend Jonathan and I, who we did Taos Lanta together, we had a little side business making websites because we could make GIFs and JPEGs, and we had some design skills, and I could code HTML, and that's all you needed. Those are all of your credentials in '96 to make a website, and
Yeah.
how things have changed. It's crazy how that the expense to get into it now can be really extreme.
Oh, definitely. Like I learned. I remember when I was in high school. I was going to college. By the way, thank you so much, Friendly Fire TV, for following. You're awesome. Welcome to the madness, my friend. No, I was going to college, and people
I
were like,
assume
man,
that's Matt. I'm Matt.
what's going on, man? No, people were telling me like, you need a portfolio, you need a website, you need a thing people can go to, and I was like, oh, okay. And so I googled like HTML and CSS, and I learned how to make a little portfolio website, and like somehow in the next 6 months, like I was just doing it, like it was a freelance thing, just do. It was, way back in the day. But yeah, it's awesome. Definitely doing art and stuff for your own RPG. That's gotta be really, really cool.
Yeah, it's fun. I get along well with my graphic designer. So I got a comment the other day on Blade. Somebody on the community G Plus forum said, "Oh, John, I was about to ask you, like, what's your relationship with your layout person? You must really trust each other so much because everything is so, like, there's a lot of synergy between the words and the layout, and it's just everything fits just right. Like, how do you guys do that?" And then I looked at the credits and I realized it's just you. But for me, honestly, like, when I'm designing, I don't know if you're like this, but I'm such a visual person that even my writing, like I like to write into my layout and write into the spaces that I have available to me, and like see how everything fits together. I want this to be kind of one page worth of information. I don't want this to sprawl across a bunch of spreads. So it just helps me organize my thoughts, and I tend to kind of do both at once. I write and do graphic design kind of together.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
Not everybody works that way.
I've never had to do layout for like a published manuscript or something. It was just never really my shtick. I ended up in like concept art, illustration,
Oh, cool.
And then branched off into like 3D modeling and sculpting. I did a little bit of that for some video game companies and whatnot for a little while. I got at it like it. I went to school for art, but I couldn't make it work as a career. By the time I got there, it was just too difficult.
It's really tough. Things are changing a bit. Patreon and that kind of thing, can help people who musicians and artists that didn't have careers before can sometimes. But it's still it's slightly easier, but it's still a very hard thing to do. Like we said before we started recording, finding an audience for whatever you're doing is a big part of the work. You have to. Mm-hmm. Put the time in.
Oh yeah, definitely. it was so I've talked to so many people, and I know you said you were starting a podcast, an interview series about game design and stuff, and it's these days it seems like everyone has their own thing that they're trying to get you to come watch or get you to come click on. And
Yeah.
I didn't like, I guess I realized it in the back of my head, but I didn't realize it until I really started promoting like this channel and the show. Just how hard it is. Like, you put a link in front of it, just how hard it is to get people to click a link. Like, it's amazing. And
Yeah.
so,
Yeah.
my friend is doing the Open Legend thing. And I assume you probably found the same thing, is like just putting your thing, like, it's gotta be so difficult just to sort of put your game system in front of people and say, like, hey, could you read this? Could you maybe play it? Try it out a little bit, like, because there's, like, it's so easy for people, like, yeah, no, but I got my thing, like, I got D&D, or I got whatever I'm doing, like, I don't really need a new thing.
That could be really tough. I was very lucky that I got involved in the indie RPG scene very early, not the very first year, but the second year, basically, when the Forge was taking off, and the second year that Ron Edwards had a booth at Gen Con, and he basically just invited all of us to come and share his booth, and he had gone to Gen Con since its inception, more or less, and so he had a really nice placement on the floor, and we just got to show up and put our games on the rack there and sell them in a place where we normally wouldn't. And at the time, the indie RPG scene was 12 designers or 8, or I forget how many of us were there. It wasn't very many people. You could buy and play all of the so-called indie RPGs. And so exposure was super easy because my book was just right there next to Dogs in the Vineyard, and it was very easy to get in at that point because it was such a small community of friends. And I think a lot of so-called, like, scenes or whatever are sort of like that, like the initial.
Looks like I'm having a Skype hiccup
With PewDiePie
sorry, we're good
and
now.
those people.
We
Okay,
had
cool.
we had a Skype hiccup for a second. Don't worry about it. It's all good.
Anyway, the point I'm trying to make was just that coming into a community early really makes a big difference, and that's not always visible to everyone, and so there can be this frustration or difficulty sometimes understanding, like, I'm making cool things too. I want people to notice my work. How do I do that? And I think it behooves us to be a little more transparent and share, like, well, I've been doing this for 20 years now, and my background is in marketing and doing ads and commercials and web marketing and all kinds of stuff like that, and selling yourself and building an audience, and it takes time and it takes marketing skills and all this stuff. It's not quite so easy as just flipping a switch. And I think we're going through a transition process where at least the very next generation will be in that place a little bit too, but I think after that, my friends' kids that are 12 years old now, like, that is totally second nature to them. They're already marketing, essentially. Like, they understand how to connect on social media, how to build a brand, how to create a presence online and attract, eyeballs and that kind of stuff. It's becoming a more commonplace skill, I think. So there'll be some growing pains here, but yeah, you can't go back. You can't go back to the early days of just 12 dudes in one booth sharing space together and stuff. It's those days are gone. So it's tough, and I sympathize, and I wish you all the best with your channel. And I think I think you're doing the right thing, right? Like, reaching out to other people and bringing in other someone else's audience to come in and see what you're doing is great.
Yeah, I mean, the thing is, like, I wanted to talk a little bit because I know we had said we were going to talk about it, but one of the reasons that I sort of started this show in particular is because I think everyone comes to role-playing games from a different perspective, with a different philosophy. They learn things differently, they have different preferences and all that. And so it's always interesting for me. I love the process of sitting down with other DMs, other game makers, game designers, game masters and saying like, and finding out. Thank you so much, Sith Master, for hitting that follow button, man. Welcome to the madness. No, I love getting people's philosophies and just seeing what I can learn from them. So I want to know a little bit. Like, I mean, I kind of, you kind of focus on a very specific type of game system. Is that sort of represented? Like, did you start in the more traditional kind of like D20 D&D games, and then just sort of realize at some point that your style was too distinct that you kind of needed to do your own thing, or was it always just how do you kind of figure out that place?
That's a great question. Yeah, for me, so I started. I mean, yeah, it's hard to say like if I started traditional or not. You tell me, but my first game was Gamma World, like first edition, yeah, I think it was first edition. 1984 is when I started playing. I think that might be second. I forget. Anyway, for us, that was weird because my uncles and the adults that were playing role-playing games were playing Dungeons and Dragons. And playing a bunch of homebrew stuff. That was the culture of gaming in its inception, and for many, many decades after that, there's always been this like homebrew, homemade thing going on where the idea of, even in the early days, the idea of like buying Advanced Dungeons and Dragons as a game product was weird. Like, they had already been playing it for a long time, and everyone knew how to play D&D. You played D&D according to, the sort of like some of the rules that were in the little brown books or whatever, but it was your GM's game, and everyone had extensive house rules for managing your family lineage or whatever. It was a very homebrew culture. And then when they started producing game books, that was my generation. Like, we didn't get to play in that because the adults didn't want to play with 10-year-olds. Mm-hmm. So my first exposure to gaming was just buying a book. Like, the whole culture was an oral tradition, and it was all based on your local group and your local practices and your local rules. And then we just bought a book, and we're like, oh, we have to learn out of this book. And so that created this weird culture clash where the kind of homemade gaming became a generation of buy a product to play a game and play by the book, and that became a thing. But for me, I kind of dodged that bullet in a way. It's a very long-winded way of answering this question. But anyway, because I played just a few sessions of Gamma World and then moved to a new town. So I took my friend's book to my dad's work, and I photocopied the mutation tables and the character sheet out of the book, and took those photocopies with me to the new town, and then rode my bike around the neighborhood and asked the kids there if they wanted to play Gamma World, and they didn't know what it was. And so we played using those photocopies. So I kind of got to enjoy this weird homebrew culture of just make up rules and canonize our own rulings and build a game system over time with a group of people. That's how I started in the hobby. So while I was doing that, the hobby itself was building up to 3rd edition D&D and Vampire, and Shadowrun, I think, was the first kind of serious... Well, no, I guess Hero System was probably the first like out-of-the-book game that we got into. But that's also like a build-your-own system kind of thing. Mm-hmm. So there's always been this... I've always been part of this culture, and also because I was an artist, like... I was always making my own character sheets and my own booklets and blah, 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 blah. So around the time when I moved to Seattle, I discovered the very early websites for this, Jared Sorensen's website, and The Forge and that kind of stuff. And I was like, oh, there are other people doing what I've always been doing, making my own little weird games. And we were playing... We were playing D&D, Moldvay especially, and Shadowrun and Hero and Over the Edge and Castle Falkenstein and Vampire, and we played everything because you could just play everything. There weren't that many games, so play was always just back and forth between homebrew, house rules, homemade games, and then published stuff. Our weird mashups of those things. But around about 94, 95, I started to get into the industry. You know, I got to work on as a playtester. I got to work on Feng Shui and Everway and some early Wizards projects like that. And Feng Shui wasn't Wizards, but anyway, that got me into the business a little. Started to make some contacts in that realm, and it was just crazy overlap, you know, between the ability to self-publish, meeting industry people. Moving to Seattle was a big thing. Like Wizards was here, and there was a lot of people to know. And then this hobbyist, homebrew, home game mentality that we always had. So all my first stuff that I was doing were free games that were later on. We did Talislanta, but after that, whatever I would make for my home campaign, I would make character sheets or whatever. I would just make a PDF of that and put it on my website for people to play if they wanted. And that's where that ball started rolling, where I was essentially just sharing my home game materials with people. And the first one that I did, Lady Blackbird, got a lot of attention, and for whatever reason, there are many reasons, but the short version is it got a lot of attention. Lots of hacks were made of it. It ended up in commercial products in various ways. Like, it just kind of filtered out into the world. And so, yeah, that, to answer your question, finally, after 8 minutes, that philosophy came from my first days of gaming, and then was reinforced because self-publishing was such a viable alternative. I never felt like, in order for someone to play this, I need to make it D20 based. That was never on my mind. I was like, well, whatever. Like, people are going to play it. They'll play it anyway. So I'll do what I've always done, and I'll do my homebrew stuff.
That's
yeah.
interesting, because I've heard some people say, I've heard people who are publishing their own indie RPGs basically be on that train where, like, if it's not something they can easily, like, equate to D&D, like, they can't say, like, oh, I'm rolling a D20 for my skill checks and this and that, then they're pretty sure, like, at least in their mind, it's going to be harder to get people to try it out, which I don't necessarily think that they're wrong in that case. I think that's an entirely valid philosophy.
I agree, except that I think that population is very tiny, and people overinflate it. I think it's true in gaming that there are crybabies who won't do anything but D20, but they're not the majority. They're just loud, and they're often angry, but they are far, far away from the majority, because really the majority are people who don't play role-playing games. So if you want to reach the biggest audience, that's the biggest audience. So you should make something that people who don't play role-playing games want to play. That's also the hardest audience to reach, so I'm not recommending that. But there's this gamer myth, cultural myth, about how, people don't like to learn new systems, D20 players only want D20 stuff, and that is true for a very small population of people who inhabit these online spaces. Like, if you go to EN World or something, you're going to get a certain view of the gamer population that is not representative of gamers as a whole, and it can be easy to just get trapped in that space. And it's, like you said, it's a true thing. There are people who don't want to learn a new system, want to stick to their thing, and that's absolutely true. But as a designer, I don't think you need to care about those people, because unless you're in the community, like if you're a D20 player, and that's your community, you should totally make D20 stuff. That's makes perfect sense. You should. Why not do that? That's your community, and those are the people that are gonna know you and want to play your game and stuff. But if you're just making games in general, I don't think you need to worry about that, because getting into any community is all kind of equally challenging. If you're an outsider, it's hard to just drop a D20 thing into the internet and go, hey, D20 people will play it. Like, probably not. So to me, I always say to an aspiring designer, like, whatever community you're in, your community of gamers, make stuff that you like to play and that your community likes to play, and share it with them, and that's how you can start to build an audience.
Yeah, Sith Master. By the way, thank you so much, Useless Fiend, for following. Welcome to the madness. I promise you're not as useless as you may think. Sith Master says, with online playing these days, it's pretty easy to, substitute any kind of dice for anything, really.
Absolutely
it's
true.
not as complicated as it was, especially like. Let me put it this way: the only reason I've been able to play systems like Warhammer Fantasy RP and Call of Cthulhu and other systems that I've not really had any experience with, but I've been able to sort of just jump in and do them because Roll20 has sort of built-in dice rolling macros and math and stuff for all that stuff. So it's like I can participate in those games without actually having to have the system explain to me,
Yeah.
oh, you need to roll this dice and you need to get under this. Like, if I can just press a button and it comes up and says yes or no, then that means I'm more likely to be able to dive into the system, which I've done in the past. But here's a thing that I actually wanted to ask you, because it's certainly something that I think is true for me. I'm very personally, just as a gamer, I'm very unlikely to go out of my way to try sort of rules lighter one page systems, only because it's one of those things where it's the same thing. I have the same problem with the DM's Guild right now, where there's really no way at a glance to differentiate whether they're worth the time or not.
Yeah.
And unless you hear buzz and reviews about them, like you look at one page of rules and it looks the same as any other one page. Like, it's just,
Yeah.
I see
Sure, sure.
some die numbers and whatnot, but there are some things that I am likely to try, and I don't know if you've ever heard this, but there's a system that I actually really, really enjoy called Big Motherfucking Crab Truckers. It's a one page RPG that is,
It rings a bell. Yeah, yeah.
it's the reason I'm likely to play is, one, because I don't know anyone who wouldn't be likely to play it after hearing the name Big Motherfucking Crab Truckers, but two, because it's a lot more like an improv game than it is like an actual RPG system.
Sure.
And so like a concept like that is interesting to me. But if you're like, hey, I've got this really, this simple RPG system, it's like, okay, you're gonna need to sell me on more than just that, because there's lots of them out there.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Sorry, what was the question? I lost the.
Oh, no,
I
no.
agree with what you said, but I don't know
I just wanted to see, like, do you have any opinions on that? Like, have you considered, like, do you consider sort of how you're designing or presenting your rules in such a way that sort of makes them more interesting, more different than just like a normal, like, you roll a d6 to see if you succeed or fail?
Yeah, 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 for sure. This is a really good topic, and it's massive.
Yeah.
And like, I would love to talk about it forever. So just cut me off whenever you need to.
No, it's
but
fine. It's fine.
I'll try to get to the heart of this topic as fast as I can. But so there's sort of two parts that I'm hearing. I think one is the marketing angle, which is, how do you distinguish yourself? How do you, like you said, the name of that game is like, that's marketing, right? That's a brilliant piece of marketing. They named their game the exact right thing so that people who hate that won't even look at it, and people who love it can't wait to play it. They don't even care what is on the page, right?
Yeah.
They hear the name and you're like, I want to play that. And if you think that's stupid, then you just turn away, and that's a marketing success. You want to alienate people who will hate your work, and you want to bring in people who will love it sight unseen. Even, that's what a triumph. If you can do that as a marketer, that's brilliant. So that's one aspect of it, and I do a lot of marketing stuff with my games, and it's too big a topic to go into. But I will say, one of the things that I see a lot of failures regarding new designers, or even seasoned vets, do this too. They don't pitch the game in a way that intrigues a player or gets them excited about its brand. They pitch the game in this sort of gamery way, this kind of awkward, like, I don't know, I've seen this on a lot of Kickstarters where the first thing they say about the game is like, it's diceless, and I'm like, no, like, why? That's not a selling point. That is not information. It doesn't matter. We could resolve things by having rap battles. My friend Remy wrote a game where you do that.
I'm gonna need a copy of those rules. By
It's
the way.
yeah. You should search RPG rap battle. Maybe you can find it.
I'm going to. I want to divert. Well, I want to say exactly why, because we have. I don't know if you've ever watched them, but Encounter Roleplay does 24-hour streams, and it gets ridiculous. There's a lot of drinking and a lot of one shots with people that So things get ridiculous. And a while ago, they were doing this thing where they have their viewer decisions, and one of the things that I suggested for them was that the vampire that they're going down to the crypt to kill is actually a lich named DJ Phylactery, and he's a rapper. And my friend, it was selected, and the guy Will was like. He's like, oh shit, how am I gonna do that? How am I gonna? And so I actually sent him. I happen to have like on speed dial this character and fully written raps for this NPC, and since then it's just become a complete fixture of the 24-hour stream. So if there's a system that we can have actual rap battles, I will probably run a one shot in that system on that show.
Well, so if you can't find Remy's game, Remy Troyer is his name, but if you can't find that, or even if you can, Jake Richmond has an mind-blowing game called See Dracula. The word SEA, See Dracula. Okay. It is a game about animal lawyers. I don't know why. The reason it's called See Dracula is too hard to explain. It's in Animal City. You do a court case. There's prosecution and defense. There's witnesses. There's a judge. And you resolve all of the arguments with musical numbers, essentially. And that game is in print, and you can buy it if you want to go down that road. See Dracula.
Oh, Twitch hiccup.
But I love it, and I think it's amazing, and everyone should try it. At GameStorm every year, they have a live band, and they set up a courtroom, and they do this whole production, and it's incredible.
Fantastic. Is there a YouTube video of this?
Yes, there is.
I'm gonna do that. Hitch, what's going on, Hitch?
Hey, Hitch.
The Mustang John Harper. I don't know what that's a reference to.
Yes, that's me. That's one of my free games. Yes.
Oh right, that's okay. I was like,
that is me, Hitch.
It is a thing I saw on his website. I thought it was just a nickname, like maybe that's what people call you.
If I could have the nickname the Mustang, that would be incredible. Holy crap! I mean, yeah, I'll take it. Yeah. So we got sidetracked. Anyway, what I was saying was marketing. One of the most important things in game marketing is intriguing someone with what you're going to do when you play. Not cool microfiction about the CD bar that the Shadowrunners meet at, and not the way the dice mechanic works. To me, all my games that have been successful in terms of number of players, getting people to actually sit and play the game, is this intriguing pitch, right? Like, Lady Blackbird is on the run from her arranged marriage. She hired the skyship, the Owl, and its smuggler crew to take her to her secret lover, the Pirate King, Uriah Flint. They've been captured by the Hand of Sorrow, the evil Imperial warship. You've been thrown in the brig, and any minute now they're going to realize that Captain Vance of the Owl is actually the Imperial exile, and you're all going to be screwed. How do you get out of the brig? That's a game. Like, that makes you play. Like, the pitch is, here's this crazy situation, and yeah, there's skyships, and there's Imperial cruisers, and there's a Star Wars-y thing maybe, or we don't know yet what it is, but
that's set dressing.
Yeah, the pitch gets you to play, and you almost play when you hear it. And the same thing with your truckers game. Like, you hear that name, and the reason it excites you is because you go, oh, here's what I'm gonna do.
Yeah.
When I play, you don't even know the rules yet. You're like, I'm gonna be this thing. I'm gonna have the truck, and it's gonna be like this. And
I feel like I should elaborate, by the way, for people who don't know, because I'm sure no one knows how to play big motherfucking crab truckers. For those of you who don't know, Big Motherfucking Crab Truckers is, if you've ever played the acting improv game called Yes End, where you just tell a story and the idea is just to continue the story, like by adding on to it and improving. Big Motherfucking Crab Truckers is a lot like that. Basically, one person, like the crab master, not the dungeon master, the crab master, will give the players a challenge. They're driving a truck. Thank you so much for hosting Hitch, by the way. You're crabs in a truck, and he'll give you a challenge, like, you're coming to the slick oil flats, what do you do to get across them? And you have to tell a story, and you keep telling a story, and it just keeps on going, and eventually, either one of your fellow crabs or the crab master will say, he'll stop believing your story, and at which point he'll say, no fucking way. And when he says that, you have to roll dice to see who's right.
Yeah.
And that's it. That's how you play.
And so this leads perfectly into part 2. So part 1 is the pitch, making something that makes people excited to play. Vincent Baker's super good at this. If you read Dogs in the Vineyard, you will see what I mean. That's a really good case study for this. Emily Boss, also her game Shooting the Moon, is one of the best examples for that. But there's the pitch part, but then there's what you were asking about, like, in terms of design and like, should you go for like D20 plus modifiers? Should you go for weird dice pools? Should you, like, how do you parse that? Where do you land? That's the question I heard anyway. And the thing that I always think of, man, I've got a lot of trucks tonight. The thing that I always think of, Vincent Baker, who wrote Apocalypse World and Dogs in the Vineyard and Poisoned and a bunch of great games, he has a few phrases that I always go back to, and he says that you make the game demands certain things from you as the designer, and it's your job to fulfill those demands such that the game gets what it needs, it doesn't have things it doesn't need, and it's not missing anything that it needs. So the process of design is, it's like my old job, like being an art director. Like, you get a client who wants something, you ought to educate your client on the thing that they want is bad and wrong and they shouldn't do it because they don't know what they're talking about. That's why they hired an agency. Then you explain to them what their actual problem is and what the solution to that problem is and how you can solve it, and then they get angry, and then they figure out you're right, and they agree, and they hire you, and then you write a spec based on that goal, and then you do everything you can to get to there. It's like software design is the same idea, right? So you try to fulfill your spec, and as a game designer, your spec is...
We got a Skype pickup again. There we go. We good? I'm having some Skype issues. Sorry, guys. I think we may lose the call here. Oh no! Are we back? Yes. Looks like we're back.
Hello. Sorry about that. I think
right.
My internet just freaked out.
Yeah, we had a little Skype pickup. Not the end of the world.
So what I was saying was your pitch, that cool pitch I talked about, is your spec. You're designing towards the pitch. You're making a little game engine, a reward cycle, and essentially a reward cycle, but there's other stuff to it that drives that pitch. How do you make it fun for Lady Blackbird to run away from her life and find a new life? How do you make an engine that helps that occur? How do you explore a dungeon and get treasure? Make an engine that drives that. And because it's 2016, as a designer, you have this huge panoply of work that came before you, and odds are, if your pitch falls somewhere in the space of adventure gaming, someone has already solved that riddle of design for you, and you may want to just build something in their space mechanically, like a D20 designer would, or like a Apocalypse World engine person would. Dungeon World is a really good example, right? Like it did not build from the bones of Dungeons and Dragons. It built from the bones of Apocalypse World because it was trying to do this other thing that has the trappings of Dungeons and Dragons, but is the engine of Apocalypse World. And so the reason you're designing a game at all is to and I include hacks in design also. Like if you're hacking D20, you're a game designer, and the reason you do that is because nothing is scratching the itch you have for the pitch that you have. If we're just playing straight up 5th edition D&D, but the pitch is you used to be dungeon crawlers, and now you're all retired, and you run a tavern together on the Sword Coast, and pirates come in all day long, and our game's going to be about swindling them of their gold in our gambling rooms, or hiking up our drink prices, or whatever. Like, you look at Dungeons and Dragons 5th edition, and you're like, okay, well, we have like mechanics for resolving actions, but we're going to need to track a bunch of stuff, like how much are we charging for stuff, and how much does stuff cost, our raw materials. Maybe we need to track our business in some way. Maybe we have a reputation for our tavern that we want to improve, or maybe there are different factions of pirates that don't get along and we need to manage who shows up because we don't want a brawl, or right. So you start down this path of building those pieces, and then you may end up at a point where you go, you know what, we don't actually need initiative anymore. That's not a thing that even happens in this game, so let's just dump it, or whatever. So those are the two parts. This is the short answer. We can talk about this a lot more, but the short answer to that bigger question is, what do you design? Where do you go? What mechanics do you use? I would say ignore all the kind of internet wisdom on this topic. Make stuff for your community, whether that's your home group or whether that's the subreddit that you are part of, or whatever. Make stuff for your community. Work on your pitch. Try to make pitches that are engaging as a gamer, that make you want to play the thing, and then design to fulfill the functional spec of your pitch.
Yeah, no, I'm definitely with you about, like, you know, figuring out, because one of the, and I think I kind of have worked a little bit in the opposite direction. I primarily run Pathfinder, and a lot of, like, when we started playing a system, like, one of my players came to me and he was like, hey man, I wanna run a blacksmith business, and like there are rules for like downtime rules and stuff, but it's like, or no, we were like, we have a caravan, I want to turn our caravan into a trading business. And so I had to actually figure out like how to build a system that was lightweight enough that I didn't have to write a lot of stuff, but I could just sort of quickly create like economic models that allowed them to engage in a way that like it seemed like there was a real world working under them. I created a thing where like you create a town name and you just assign it like one of 4 different classes that would define its size, its spending power, its natural resources, and its you know, what it bought and sold. Basically, if you've ever played like the old Sierra games like Caesar or Pharaoh or anything, it was exactly
I have.
Yeah, it was exactly like the trading thing in that, but I built it for D&D.
And that's a perfect example of successful game design, right? You had a problem to solve, you solved it in a way that excited your players, and like you were saying too about playing online with automated systems and stuff. There is a great benefit to games sort of taking abstract concepts or very precise mechanical things, hiding them behind an algorithm, and just giving you just roll on the disposition table, and the game designer has worked out like how all of that works behind the scenes, but all the player has to do is, oh, I got a 6, they're hostile, and that's all you need to know, right? And that's a great. One could argue that is the entire point of game design. Vincent puts a good way on his blog. He says that the role of the game system is to not smooth things over, but to insert itself very forcefully into the conversation of play, but in a way that is surprising to everyone, but feels inevitable, right? It's the same it's the same formula as a good mystery novel, right? You figure out that you learn the who did it. It's surprising if the author is good. You couldn't figure it out, like, it wasn't super obvious, but it feels inevitable. You go, oh, of
Yeah,
course
yeah,
it was.
yeah.
And so game design can do that, where we're having a perfectly functional conversation to establish how the fight with the goblins goes, and we could just do that because we're good at that. But then the game system goes, yeah, but you rolled a natural 20. Now things are different. Now, like, you cut off this goblin's head, and now the rest of them have to make a morale check, and they might retreat, and we all go, oh, of course, yeah, that makes
Yeah.
sense. And so you're hiding all of the stuff behind the curtain, but when the game kind of like lurches out into the light of play, it's unwelcome in one sense. It's sort of surprising or disruptive to our conversation. But then everyone goes, "Well, that makes sense, though. Yeah, that's right. That's
I've always been a proponent of, like, if you like if if someone asks to do something, like, I don't know, it could be like, hey, I want to leap off a balcony and try and stab someone on the ground, and I say, okay, let me just check real quick, and like, because in my head I create a scenario, like, I think this should be how this would be ruled. Like, it would be this check followed by this, this guy takes this much damage, this guy takes this whatever, and then you look and it's like, yeah, that is how it works. Like, because I didn't technically need to check the rules because I already came up with the answer. It just so happens that the answer was intuitive enough that the rules were already doing it. That's, to me, that's interesting. Like, it's interesting design. Because
totally.
it means the game designers have sort of preempted or at least play tested this and figured out what issues might come up, or thought about what might come up in the course of play. Like Pathfinder's,
Right.
Pathfinder, I don't want to keep cutting you off, but Pathfinder's constantly doing that. It seems like, I know their rule system is bloated and it doesn't work in a lot of ways, but what interests me is that they keep adding modules that address new things that have certainly come up in games over the 12-year lifespan of the system. But now they're adding ideas to it. Like, they just added, recently in the last year, like, occult rituals. They just added a system for, like, a mechanical system for having a debate in the game. Like, for using a debate skill to persuade things, or I forget exactly what they called them, like intellectual duels or something like that. Like, it's something that almost certainly has come up in someone's game at some point. And it's interesting that they've already built the system, so now they're just taking the time to address these things.
And that thing you were talking about with jumping off the balcony is a good example of how you're in sync or not with the game, with the pitch, right? Like, if we use the system, if you jump off the balcony and we use the system, and the answer is you shatter your femur, roll to see if it cuts your femoral artery. It does. Okay, you start bleeding out. Roll to see how many turns you have left. Okay, that establishes the DC for the surgeon check to find the retracted artery and get a hold of it. Then there's a further DC to clamp it so that you don't die. Right? Like, if that's what happens in that moment, and we're playing Star Wars, we're gonna be like, what the fuck is going on? Yeah. But if that happens in that moment and we're playing CSI, crime scene investigation, and we're like reconstructing
like
what happened,
or something like that,
or potentially Call of Cthulhu also, or Blue Planet, written by an ER doctor, so it has one of the most like insane wounding systems ever. But it's gritty and it fits.
Yeah.
And so. It's like both things. It's like the game has to. You were saying, like, oh, I looked up the rules later, and it was exactly like I was totally in sync with the game, and that to me means that the pitch for that game was very good. Like, you were on the same page with the game, and when the game stepped in and did its thing, it felt just right. And there are games still today, people still make them, but there was a glut in the 80s and 90s of games that did not understand this at all and had systems just ripped out of something else and stuck in because you should have uh, grappling rules, or you should have underwater combat rules because games have that. And why on earth does the Pokemon RPG have underwater grappling rules? Like, it's crazy. So yeah, it goes back to that unity of design, harmony of pieces, kind of thinking.
By the way, I just want to sidetrack, but I missed it before. Thank you so much, Goomba Apocalypse and Noodle, for following. You guys are awesome, and welcome to the madness. And also for Unmade for hosting us and for dropping by. Welcome everyone. Thank you for stopping by. If you guys are just joining us, and we have had some questions that I do want to get to, because we're coming up on the second hour, and at the if you guys are just joining us, you are hanging out on Fuzzy Dice, the Dungeon Master show here on the Exploding Dice channel, and I'm hanging out with my my new friend John Harper. We're talking RPGs, we're talking game design, and all kinds of stuff. And we've had a bunch of questions, and I do want to get to them because, as you guys know, the second half of my show, I love to dedicate to Q&A with the viewers. So if you guys are just getting here or you have not yet, I'm putting it in chat, !Fuzzy, as Dice Thulu will remind you. That you guys can shoot us your questions in chat. We'll try and get to them. I do want to go way back because Serial Comma said something way back in chat, and I wanted to get to it. This was before we even started.
Suzanne, she had a great question. Let's do it.
Yeah. She said, when you begin a new game with friends, what percentage of your campaigns are pre-strategized among the group? And I just lost the question. And what percentage are completely spontaneous, and which is sort of your preference?
Yeah, so I think this question is about planning the campaign. Like, do you plan ahead of time, like, we're gonna play the story of how Hrothgar gets his throne back, versus let's make characters and just see what happens? That's kind of what I'm hearing, I think.
Yeah. I guess what she's asking is, like, if you got a new campaign starting, much like I do. I have a new campaign starting in a few weeks. What do you write? Do you write a plot? Like, how much do you prep beforehand, and how much do you just sort of we're just gonna go and we're gonna see what what we need to write later?
Yeah, so I have a fairly... I hate false dichotomies, which is every dichotomy, but I tend to be fairly dichotomous on this point as a gamer. And I always have to preface this, because when it comes to dichotomies and when it comes to preferences on the internet, everyone hears dogma. They hear, this is how you ought to do things, and this is right and that is wrong. So I have to preface this by saying I'm going to say what I like to do, and it has no bearing on good, bad, right? Like, it's not a qualitative thing. So I cannot deal with a GM planning campaign ahead of time that I play through. I do not do that. I don't like to do it. There are exceptions, which have been amazing, and I will do it again in the future under certain conditions. But in general, like, if we're just saying, like, generally speaking, I don't want to play through the module that you have. I don't want to play through your campaign that you wrote ahead of time. I don't want to do that. Now, the exceptions are notable. I should mention what they are. If I've gamed with you a lot and I know you, I'll do anything at all in gaming. You can be like, dude, I wrote out every scene, and you're just going to play act through my scenes. And I'll be like, okay, you're my friend. Like, let's try it. Fine, let's do it. And I've played in very, what I would call kind of scripted or heavily plotted campaigns that have been awesome. The Great Pendragon campaign is a great example, right? One of the iconic campaigns of gaming. It's really fun. And I would totally play that again. So there are exceptional cases, just to preface that. But in general, my preference is, this is a game design problem that's kind of been solved over the past 10 years or so, where you can play a game with no prep as a GM, because the game system, the act of character creation typically creates a setup that everyone can play after that with no prep, and it's going to work great. And if you have a very good game system, I don't mean just like, okay, this is an exceptional quality that some games have. Um, their character creation, the thing you say after everyone looks up and goes, okay, I'm done with my character, as a GM, you have planned nothing at all, and the thing you say after they're done with their characters is fun and interesting, and you have a fun session and you play and you have a good time, because that character creation is very good. Apocalypse World is the best example probably, or Monster Hearts, or The Quiet Year, or there's a bunch of games in this space, but they do a thing in character creation where making your character puts a question on the table that that character can answer, and then we play to find the answer. So it's, as a GM, it's super easy, right? You put out the playbooks, they choose the gunlugger. Someone says, I'm the gunlugger, and you go, okay, the question is, who does the gunlugger murder with all their guns? And someone chooses the hardholder, and you go, how does the hardholder keep their holding against the raiders? And someone chooses the brainer, and you go, how does the brainer understand the psychic maelstrom and what it means for the apocalypse? And by the time that's all done, you have raiders attacking the holding that the gunlugger can murder, and they have the map to the psychic well for the psychic maelstrom, and it's all, you're just done. Like, you don't need to prep anything. It doesn't mean that games where you have to prep are bad games. It just means that as a GM and as a player, I prefer that mode where you go, almost saying let's play Apocalypse World is like saying let's play the campaign where Hrothgar gets his throne back. They're kind of like equivalent in a way.
So I have a question, and I want to ask it after I tell you why I'm asking it specifically. Because anyone who knows me, anyone who's hung out in this on this show, and we have a couple people who definitely have, knows that I am a horrible writer. I'm not good at it. I don't call myself a writer, and for that reason, I run a lot of modules. And the reason is I have no problem with them. In fact, I think a lot of them are written in much better than I could probably come up with interesting ideas for. And what I generally do is I will, like, what I'm decent at is reading through them and figuring out which plot points need more development, which story elements need to be swapped around so the story makes more sense or has more dramatic impact, or things like that. Like that I'm decent at. So very rarely would I play a module will it ever be just right off the page. It will almost, I'm running right now. I've been running for my Friday group, Pathfinder Adventure Paths. I've ran first Rise of the Rune Lords, and now I'm running Curse of the Crimson Thorn. And I've rewritten heavily the adventure. I've added a ton of stuff, and I've rewritten it. But the story is hits the same beats. They're the same, it takes place in the same setting. They're the same NPCs. The players are doing the same things. And there's no I've never really run into a point where any player turned to me and said hey man, this story's really cool, but I wish we could be doing something that we wanted to do. So that no one's ever actually come to me and said that, only because at least I think, and as far as I can tell, the way that I've managed to deliver the story is such that the things that we're doing to advance the campaign are things that the players want to do because they're somewhat invested in the campaign and the setting. And that's why I want to ask you, because you say, and I've met someone a long time ago. I met someone in a game where I was gonna run. There was my first foray into 5th edition. I was gonna run their starter module, Lost Mine of Phandelver or something. I wanted something easy so I could get my hands on the system. And the guy said, the guy in the group said, I don't like modules. I don't want to, if you're gonna run a module or it, don't tell me. I don't want to know, because if I know, it will ruin my experience. So would it do you think you could have just as good of an experience if you didn't actually know that you were playing a pre-made adventure?
No, I don't like people to lie to me, so that's out.
Oh, no. I'm not saying I'm not saying would finding out I'm saying in the course of actually playing.
No, because so Yes, I mean a good enough charlatan could fool me, and I would never know. But that's the opposite of gaming. The thing you're talking about your modules is buy-in and expectations. So
Yeah.
you say I'm going to run these modules, and all those people say that sounds fun to me, and they're telling the truth, which isn't always the case. Sometimes people say, "Sure, I'll do that," and
Well, yeah,
really they
because they
mean
just want to play. They don't really care
they just
what
want to
you say.
play, and they,
Yeah.
they really mean, "Yeah, I'll do it, but you better do it the way I like, or I'll be bitchy about it." Um, so your players are honest, and they said, "Yeah, modules are fine," and then you ran it, and they were like, "This is fun," and that's the core of our hobby. It's a social thing. It's like saying, "Hey, come to my barbecue," and everyone shows up, and you go, "Oh, I don't have a barbecue." Like you can't do that, right?
Yeah.
The basis of play is, do you guys want to do this thing? I'm going to try to pitch it in a way that's as close to true as I can make it, and you assess whether you're in or out. And that guy goes, "No, I don't want to play modules, I'm out." Or the guy says, "I do want to play modules, I'm in." And when you have everybody in, you play and it's fun. And it's the same thing with me. Like, uh, I've run Death Frost Doom a few times, the Lamentations of the Flame
Yeah.
Princess module. That's
I've
sort of
been meaning to get into that system, or at least get into those things, because I've heard they're ridiculous in the way that I tend to like, and it might be fun
yeah.
to adapt them to other systems.
They're crazy, and like Lamentation, there's a bunch of stuff about the publisher and some other stuff that's troublesome. But in general, like their modules are pretty cool, but they're very old school. They're very well, they're not very. It's they're old school to me. Like they reach back to like this sort of precursor. They're location-based adventures. They're not plot-based. You go to a place and
they're a retro clone basically.
Yeah. And so, but I've run it a few times. If someone said I'm running Death Frost Doom, do you want to play in it? I would totally play in it. I know all the secrets of Death Frost Doom, but I would still play it anyway because it's great. Or Keep on the Borderlands or whatever.
Tomb of Horrors is one of my favorites.
Tomb of Horrors is a terrible module, but I love it.
I know.
It's awful.
Dude,
I love it.
I had an argument. Who did I have an argument with the other day? Not the other day. It was a couple weeks ago. But like, because I'm assuming you know John Wick.
Yeah.
He wrote a blog article about Tomb of Horrors and how it's the worst thing ever written. And I'm like, I agree with everything you're saying if this was 1977, but it's not. No one goes into this module not knowing what to expect. Like, none of what you're saying applies anymore because people who play this play it for fun.
Yes.
You know, you cannot drop Tomb of Horrors on your players unsuspectingly. It just can't be done.
No, and it's so fun to go in knowing. And my friend Tony Dowler, he ran it for us one time where he let us. I think we were level 15. Anything. This was a third edition era.
Yeah.
Anything from any supplement, custom create a level 15 character, twink it as much as you want, go crazy. And we're gonna go through Tomb of Horrors, and that was amazing. Like we all, like I was a fairy rogue, you know, so I'm invisible and I could fly and I auto backstab everything, and it was awesome. And a bunch of the horrible traps in that module totally don't matter if you can fly, which is funny.
Yeah.
So playing modules itself is not a problem. Like in fact for a year I ran D&D at my workplace, and I just printed off a one-page dungeon off the one-page dungeon website every night before we played, and we played it. But to me, there's a difference between module in that sense and a plot. Like we're going to play through a plot, and first you go here, then you find out about the murder, then you care about solving the murder, so you go to this place and you interview these people, and then they are traitors, and that makes you go here, and then you find the Duke, and by the end of the session you have the big fight with his doppelganger at the 3-hour mark, and it's this very like scripted series of events, and that is not bad gaming. That is fun. People love it, and you should do it. I don't like to play scripted plot stuff like that. It rankles with me unless it's the pitch is very constrained. Like if it's like You guys are special investigators sent from the crown to find out if a doppelganger is running the kingdom, and we make characters up to do that, and then we play through this plot. Like that makes sense to me.
So
But if it's like you're adventurers, you go on adventures, now care about this
yeah,
stuff.
here's an
That's
interesting thing. When I was starting Curse of the Crimson Throne, by the way, I'm gonna drop a link in chat. You should totally check it out because the question was about how much do you prep, and this is an image that I made along. I'm a very visual thinker, so it's basically how I planned the entire second chapter. Like that's basically what my notes for the second chapter looked like.
oh nice.
That's
I'll
how.
open that up.
Yeah, that's how I plan things.
Oh yeah, there you go. Yeah.
And it's a spider web of ridiculousness. But what happens is like Curse of the Crimson Throne, if you don't know, is the second adventure path that Paizo published for Pathfinder.
Yes.
And the pitch is that it takes place entirely within one city, which I thought was cool already. And so like when we started, I gave my players the source book for the setting, and I said, here's your source book. This is the city in a nutshell. Read it, become familiar with it, because you're gonna want to know. You're gonna need to find a reason to care about this place. Find something about it that resonates with you, and build a character for that. And then the second thing I said was, when you're building characters, is there's this dude. His name is Gadrin. He's a bad dude. He runs gangs. He runs drugs, and he's had his fingers in a lot of different things over the years. Tell me how he fucked with your life in some way. And that's it. That's like, there is a plot about like the city devolves into riot, and the players become members of the guard, and there's a plague that hits the city immediately after, and like those are things they get involved in. But that's not stuff the players are like. We don't go into it saying like, and you're gonna stop the queen and she's evil. Like,
But the important thing to remember is you stepped in as a game designer and made character creation end at a point where those characters are going to engage in what happens next in a really fruitful way. And that's what I was talking about with Apocalypse World and Dogs in the Vineyard and stuff. Like, good modern game design does that. You have a character creation process where at the end of that process, the very next scene that happens is something that all of those people you just created care about doing.
Yeah.
And that's what classic games did too. D&D, Tom Moldvay, one of the greatest lines in a game book is, the adventure begins outside the entrance to the dungeon. Because you make dungeon crawlers, and so the adventure starts looking at the entrance to the dungeon. It does not start in a tavern with a guy in the corner with a map. It does not start there. It starts at the dungeon because you made dungeon crawlers. And so your game, there's a plot in a city and yada, yada, yada. But if you had not stepped in as a game designer and made character creation work, and you just said, bring a D&D 5th edition character to the table tonight, and we'll start playing.
No, absolutely. Like, I could...
What a nightmare,
I can't play, but I can't, like... I learned at some point, like, I can't do... I have to be... And it's a weird thing. I don't know... I don't know if you play D&D anymore, but when you did, like, I don't know how hands-on of a DM you are with your character creation, but I find that I have to be incredibly hands-on with my character creation. With each... Like, I have to sit down with each player individually and talk about their character, because I need to make sure that going into the first session, they're prepared to have a character that's going to engage with the world in a way that is interesting to them.
But the reason you have to do that is because you're not playing Dungeons and Dragons, and let me unpack that.
I understand. No, I follow you already.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So if you were, you could say show up with the 5th edition character, because they would know. What we're going to do tonight is we're going to hear rumors about 3 different dungeons, and we're going to pick one to go to. We're going to go there, we're going to get all the treasure out of the place, and we're going to go back to town and resupply. And given that game, you can show up with any 5th edition character and play. That's what the game is. Yeah. That's what it's about. But if you're playing intrigue in the city with different factions and stuff, then you can't do that. You have to be a game designer. You have to step in. And so there are games that grow completely out of that space where they not only build on the core of D&D to play a city intrigue game, they just make a city intrigue game of their own, and you just play that instead.
To roundabout in a long way, I think... we definitely have very different philosophies. I plan. I like to over prepare things because that's just like it's a habit. I'm very bad. I over prepare when I'm starting a campaign, and then I proceed to never actually read my notes during the campaign. So that's people don't know that I write notes and then I never read them.
Yeah, no, and that's part of prep. I do that too. Like your prep diagram with the circles and lines
Yeah,
looks exactly like mine, except mine are NPCs
yeah,
and who they hate and who they like
yeah.
instead of places and
Yeah,
events.
those are
But it's
those are
the
little for me. Those are little vignettes. Like when I hear the name, like if I write Docs or Doc Deal, in my head, I'm visualizing the scene. I know what I need to know going in there because I can see like a snapshot of it. I don't necessarily need to write all the details because it's like when we get there, I'm like, okay, so this is a scene where this is gonna happen. So I need this guy and I need this guy and but for me, I'm more interested. Like I need to make sure that all those like the reason I write all those lines and stuff is because if I don't, then like what I need to do is I need to lay these things out and say like, okay, what like does the clue that they're gonna get here? Where does it lead? It leads to here, and this clue has to lead them to make this next thing, so that this part that I'm setting up in the future makes sense. Like it's all so that hopefully it looks nuts, but it's so hopefully when the story is flowing, things are connecting enough that they make sense and they follow logically, and the players can make those connections on their own.
Right, and so we're talking about these again, false dichotomy. But let's pretend there are two schools of gaming.
Yeah.
There aren't, but let's pretend. One is, as a player, I want to show up and play through my GM's campaign because they're awesome and they have awesome scenes and they come up with these cool places and they make beautiful maps and they have music or whatever. Like, I want, as a player, I want to show up, I want to sit down, and I want to go, then, okay, holy shit, then what happens? Oh, shit, okay, fuck, now we have to fight the Lich. Damn, oh, my God. It's like watching a TV show almost. Yeah. You show up to this guy's show, or gal's show, and they put on a show for you, and you get to participate in it, you get to make decisions, you get to play the hero, but it's like, it's an entertainment to some degree, and you don't want the GM to look at you and go, what do you really care about? What does your character want to pursue in their life? They're going to be like, wait, why are you asking me that? I just tell me the next cool part of the thing, and they're not gonna enjoy it if you flip the tables on them and like try to make it a story game or whatever. And then in this false dichotomy, the other world is you play with players who are essentially the entertainers, and the GM is the viewer, and that's how I play. And I show up and I go, what are these guys going to get up to tonight? I can't wait to find out what they do. This is going to be really entertaining. Is Cantor actually going to keep his girlfriend after he murdered all her friends? Like, that's insane. That's probably not going to work out for him. And everything's flipped. So in terms of prep and in terms of workload, it's all on the players, and well, not all, but you know what I mean. Like
which requires a very specific type of player, one that you trust very deeply to do that.
Well, yes, but I would say the trust issue is in both camps. Like in the other camp, it's trusting the players to go along with your story, and the players trusting you as a GM to tell a cool story. And in the other camp, it's trusting the players to have compelling characters that are interesting to follow, and them trusting me to play my NPCs. You know what I mean? Like there's still trust in both camps, but I totally understand what you're saying.
I don't mean to cut this question short, but we do have a couple others that I do want to get to, and we could talk for. I know we could both talk forever about this subject.
That's a huge topic, but yes.
Unmade Mike said, where is it? He says I want a good system that does Pathfinder's Kingmaker type stuff, but their Pathfinder Kingmaker rules are some of the most complicated ever. Suggestions. I don't know if you're familiar with it. Pathfinder Kingmaker is an adventure path where they were trying their hand at sort of a hex crawl thing, the first chunk of it was they gave you a hex crawl map, and they and it basically consisted of you walk into a hex, you roll a random table to see what you find there, and you do that until you find like a dungeon with a boss in it, and then once you take out the boss and you have saved the River Kingdoms, you're basically given a town, and you build you use like kingdom building rules to,
Hmm.
you spend money on businesses or farming and this and that, and you basically simulate yourselves building and ruling a kingdom. But
Yeah,
it's
yeah, yeah.
it's the rules are not very good, as
Yeah.
Pathfinders want to do.
I'm familiar with those rules, and only in the sense that they're somewhat infamous for not being very good.
Yeah.
Uh,
Do you know any systems that sort of attempt that kind of thing? Because I don't off the top of my head.
yeah, there are a few. So one name that I will mention is Kevin Crawford. He's a game designer who makes D&D. They're all kind of D20-ish game systems, if you're into that, which I love Kevin's games. They're amazing. Um, Stars Without Number is probably his most well-known game.
Mm-hmm.
It's a science fiction hex crawly sandbox OSR inspired game. That game itself, if you want to do sci-fi, just particularly with the supplements, Stars Without Number is free, by the way. But if you get the supplements, there is a like galactic kind of domination thing that you can play that's in that vein if you want to do sci-fi. But fortunately, Kevin has a bunch of other games too. One of them is called Red Tide, which is a fantasy implementation of his game that deals with empire stuff, kingdom stuff. It's not like building a kingdom per se. You can sort of do that, but it's more like the Visigoths are at the gates kind of thing, where you're like there's a kingdom and it's threatened by this external force, and you can deal with it. Or Japan, like Death of Imperial Japan, that kind of thing. But he also has a game called Other Dust, which is a post-apocalypse game where you're like scratching out your survival, and you have to build a community, like a hard hold, and like survive and build up a place to live. Again, not a kingdom, but he does a bunch of stuff in that space that's amazing, and you can crib mechanics from there to like how you track your population and how you have resources of water and food for your people that isn't like super annoying to track. And it's really he has a bunch of awesome mechanics in that regard. And also Ben Robbins, who wrote Microscope, he has a game that's built on Microscope called Kingdom, which is exactly this.
Yeah, I think you could probably, if it doesn't work out by itself, you could definitely do a Microscope hack to
Yeah, I mean, Kingdom is a Microscope hack to do a kingdom, so it's great. If you like Microscope, just play Kingdom. It's perfect for doing that thing. But in a GM-less way. If you want to play a GM'd game, I would lean heavily in Kevin's direction. Some other equivalents that didn't click for me, like Rain, where you build up a company, it didn't do it for me, but a lot of people like Rain. Greg Stoltz is a great designer, so that might be your jam.
Yeah, this is definitely a place I don't really have a lot of experience. And since we're talking system recommendations and stuff, and again, I will have no decent answer to this, but Hitch said, but with two respected people on camera, I don't know who he's talking about. Who's the second? I don't know.
I'm actually two respected people.
Oh, okay.
I don't know if you knew that, but it's that's a thing.
Okay, well, you can share a camera, which is always good. Save money that way. He says, any recommendations for DM versus one player detective session? Things like I guess Gumshoe. Yeah, definitely not my wheelhouse.
No, Gumshoe's not my thing either. I love Robin Laws. He's a great game designer. Gumshoe doesn't click for me, but it's a really good system if you like it. It's cool. One-on-one detective mystery. I don't think someone has made that. There are probably the best noir detective game is Dogs in the Vineyard. I know that sounds weird if you know what that game is about. It's about pre-state Utah and the pseudo-Mormon outriders that visit communities. But it is built on the noir model, where the outsider, the detective, comes into a community that has a status quo and everything's in balance. And because the outsider shows up, all those little status quos get broken, and the outsider has to pass judgment on the people and leave them decimated or have justice prevail or whatever happens. I would, if you're in that, if you're feeling that, if you're feeling like the Maltese Falcon or the Big Sleep or that kind of thing where you're Philip Marlowe and you're just like slapping dudes around and telling them how it's going to be, I I highly recommend playing Dogs in the Vineyard. It's weird because it's out of genre. It's a Western, and but you're gonna get that feeling. It delivers that feeling better than any other game, where you show up in town and you're like, this is right, this is wrong. We're the law. We're all of your little petty squabbles and weird perversions and hidden crimes and stuff. We're gonna shine a flashlight into all that, and it's really great. I'm surprised no one has done like a straight up noir hack of Dogs in the Vineyard. Maybe they have. I haven't seen it.
Yeah, I said, definitely not my wheelhouse. I have very little experience there. But Hitch says that noir is good for him, and it looks like he's he's interested. So give it a try.
It a shot. Also, Greg Stolze has a game called A Perfect World. A Perfect World is what it's called. It's a noir game that has actual mechanics for how forgiving or vengeful your character is, and it's pretty cool. I've only played a one shot, but something to check out.
Yeah, Hitch says I was useless. I said at the beginning I will be mostly useless in a lot of the discussion on today's show.
So let me answer the unspoken question.
Yeah.
Should you play many role-playing games or stick to one? You should play many. I have a spreadsheet where I track how many games I've played. I'm in the 300s now, I think, and that's where you want to be, in my opinion. If you're a game designer, sorry, I forgot to preface that. If you're designing games, game players, whatever, just play one or whatever you want to do. But if you're a game designer, play as many as you can, because you're gonna have this encyclopedia in your head. And when you're designing or when you're running a game, you can go, oh yeah, in Dogs in the Vineyard, I make a crime by choosing the sin that is the root of the crime. That's a really useful thing. I'm gonna do that in my D&D game. What's the sin in this town? It's pride. Let's base everything around pride, right? So you like have this big card catalog of stuff that you can draw from. And Suzanne actually asked that question, didn't she? She asked.
Yeah, she said, I was just looking at it, but unfortunately, Ankbot scrolls me back.
Yeah.
Every time. It says, do you think that playing games other than D&D makes you a better DM?
Absolutely. Yes.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, in the sense that, like, obviously, it's better to have a repertoire of other ideas that you can kind of crib from and make the things that that you may not be able to make work in the system or that you may run into. But that's not to say, like, I know people who've only ever run D&D in their lives and are amazing DMs. And it's not that they're like, I don't necessarily think running other systems would really do a whole lot for them, other than that they'd just be probably really good at running those other systems because they would have to worry about less rules and things like that.
Yeah, I would say that, like everything, if you're awesome, then just keep being awesome.
Yeah.
If you're not and you want to get better, playing other games may help you.
I don't. Again, coming from an art background, I'm sure no one should ever really be satisfied with how they're doing things. Like, you should never think that you're great. Like, if you don't walk away from, my philosophy is, if you don't walk away from every session wanting to change at least 5 things, then you probably are doing something wrong.
So I'm a A type, an alpha personality. I'm an extrovert to some degree. I tend to be a little bit bombastic, a little bit, come across like I'm the best kind of thing. And so that can cover the fact that like everyone else, particularly when I was working as an illustrator and a graphic designer, you want your work to be well received. You want people to like what you're doing. You do care what people have to say about it. Otherwise, you should just draw it in a notebook and then throw it into the sea and not ever show it to anyone. But there's a tendency among other personality types that are maybe neurotic or introverted or whatever, to assume ahead of time that people don't want to hear what you have to say, or that why would anyone care what I think, and those kind of things. And I think that there's this balancing act to be had between I'm the best, everyone pay attention to me, and I'm the worst, why would anyone care about me? And that the phrase that we developed in the creative agency world was, how can this be better? And it skates that line between, it's not what's wrong with this and how can we fix it, or let's all praise these awesome qualities that so-and-so did. Regardless of what the presentation was, regardless of the work, it was a huge success. It was Microsoft's most popular event ever. Hooray! How can this be better? It was a disaster. No one liked it. How can this be better? It's always a good question. Yeah. And there's no judgment. It's not saying, you failed or you're the worst, or, it's this perfect middle of the road question.
The thing about it's interesting is I think no one really, I don't want to say no one, but a lot of people who are not creatives, in their normal life. Like, again, you and I come from an art background, which means we sort of grew up critiquing ourselves and, asking for critique from other people. And,
you grow a thick skin.
You learn to be your own, your own harshest critic. You learn because it's the only way that works. But most people are not like that. Most people don't grow up in that background. They don't kind of come from that milieu. So when they get into D&D, like DMing specifically, they don't think of it as a creative endeavor. It's just they're playing a game. It's whatever.
Yeah.
So they're not used to the idea that you should be coming away from things saying like, even if you walk away from a session saying, feeling great, or walking away from a show feeling great or whatever, it's like you should still immediately run and make notes about what can I do better next time. Did I flub my description, or maybe I realize that in the moment I'm not good at giving enemy dialogue that sounds threatening, so maybe I should probably write that down beforehand. Like there's always something, and a lot of people are just not used to sort of taking that criticism and internalizing it and constantly work. And it's it's something that as a DM and as hopefully a DM educator, it's something that I try and impart to people, like, always be challenging yourself. Like, it doesn't matter if your players came away cheering and thinking it was the best session ever. Like, still, if you think it was a fantastic session, then don't just find 5 things. Find 10 things, because that way, hopefully your next session will be even better.
Absolutely. And in hand in hand with that, give yourself permission to fail, because that's how you know that you're trying really hard. If you never fail, you're way in your comfort zone, and that may be fine for a game night. Like, that doesn't mean you got to just keep pushing it. Maybe you've hit the right level for your game night and you're good.
Yeah.
But yeah, pushing and failing is always good, and that it's very good to talk to your players about that ahead of time and be very open with them and say, look, guys, I'm very nervous about this. I don't know how this is going to go. I need your help here. Like, I couldn't figure out a way. I spent all week trying to figure out a way for you guys to find out this thing that you should have found out 3 sessions ago, and I cannot figure it out. So I'm just going to tell you what it is. And you say, look, you should have found out that the princess was an illusion.
Yeah.
And you just didn't, and I couldn't. I just can't make it work. And one of your players will be like, well, we would have found it out, though, because when we were in the room, I cast detect magic, and you go, oh right, I forgot. Yeah, okay, great, thanks, and you're fine, right?
There was a moment in Curse of the Crimson Throne I remember. There was a bunch of moments. Like there was one moment where I planned an entire session with these little stealth enemies, and the players just completely checked out like halfway through combat because it just wasn't fun. In my head, it was an interesting, kind of challenging encounter that kind of twisted their perceptions a little bit because you have these things like firing at you from the dark. And by the way, Hitch, thank you for stopping by. It's good to have you. Thank you for the host, man. And hopefully you do well with those systems that were recommended to you. But yeah, so I created this encounter and it didn't work. And then there was this other point where we were talking about things. I forget exactly what. There was this NPC that the players had made friends with, and they were either they had just come from talking. Yeah, they just come from talking to him, and he was basically bad mouthing the queen. He didn't like her. And the players were like, wait, like, are we supposed to not like her? Because really, as far as we can tell, she hasn't done anything. And I'm like, well, I said, okay, so it turned out there was really only one player who wasn't on the same page, and it was just because in his case, I guess it hadn't really been explained properly, like what the people in the city felt about the queen, like what their like. He knew that a lot of people in the city disliked her. There were riots, and people spat out, her name and whatnot. But he couldn't exactly figure out why. And the reason was just because I had failed to sort of explain these details, because I had assumed that because everyone read the player's guide and everyone was kind of caught up, that everyone was on the same page. We all knew exact sort of the basic. And so when I was like, yeah, well, she is she is Chelish, and she has said some pretty nasty things about the city, and she calls everyone peasants, and they don't like the fact that this young Chelish woman just came in and married their old, really well liked king. And he was like, oh, okay, yeah, now I get it. That makes sense. But that was like, it's one of those things where you just assume that things are working, but there's always opportunities, and if you can't figure out, like, if your players aren't coming to a conclusion, you may have to ask them, like, hey guys, what exactly do you know about so and so, like what's going on? And because even you don't necessarily, maybe you don't want to tell them explicitly. Maybe you want to do what I do, which is put on a face like you know what you're doing, and then just kind of slyly say, like, "Hey guys, so what do you know about the this thieves guild that's going on, like, and the crimes you've heard about?" And they'll be like, well, we know they did a thing with the, and then you may say in your head, oh, okay, yeah, I failed pretty hard there. I'm gonna go ahead, I'm gonna double back, and I'm gonna reintroduce this into the story in a more clear and obvious way, so they or have an NPC walk up and explain it to them and pretend like that was entirely intended the whole time.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it goes back to that, like your campaign setup question about your crime lord, right? Yeah. You always have that in your toolbox, and you can go, oh, but actually, like, which one of you would be most likely to hear rumors in the underworld?
Yeah.
And someone is like, well, I probably would, because, I sort of grew up on the docks. And you're like, okay, you have a friend? And they're sort of nodding with you, and you're like, you have a friend. Her name is Jewel.
Have you ever done this? When I started Crimson Throne, one of the things that I did, because what I knew going into it was, I know how to DM a setting, a small setting where there's NPCs that the players can meet and this and that. But when you're talking about a city, a big, like, metropolis, there's no way that the players can feasibly know enough people to pretend like they're locals here, because a lot of people in a city, a lot of places. But what I did was I said, okay, so each of you, I want you to create 3 NPCs. I don't care who they are. They're not like, obviously they're not like government officials. They're not like rich nobles. They're just people.
It could be.
Well, maybe in a minor sense. Like, there are limits on it, because these aren't designed to be like. They're designed to be contacts, but not in a way that will, like, give you a leg up over the story, but enough that, like, if you, for example, one of my players had, he was a drug user, he was a former gang member, he'd done time in prison, and so one of his contacts was his old street dealer, named Swarthy. And so like when they heard that when they were all brought together and said like, I want you to get revenge on Gadrin, you know, find this guy, and they said, oh shit, well we don't really even know where to look for him. And he says, well, he's involved in drugs. I know a drug dealer. You know, maybe we can start there. And it's, you know, that's really all they're designed to be. Is they're just designed to be jumping off points so the players can access information that they otherwise would not really have a path to access on, because they probably wouldn't think like, oh, where do I go to ask about a crime lord in the city? Like, who could I go? I don't know who to ask about that.
So I'm chuckling because the people who play Blades in the Dark in the chat are laughing right now, because this is the solution. On your character sheet on Blades, you have a list of people that you know from different areas of the city, and this is the exact same solution. And it's very funny that like this is the right thing to do, right? Like we both independently came to this place where we were like, oh, how can you run a city module? There's too much information. They can't know all this stuff. We need to give them concrete characters that they know from their past. And that's how you do it. In my case, because I don't have a story to protect, their contacts can be anyone at all, including the leader of the cops or a demon or whatever. Because the story, there's no story. Like I don't know what the story is ahead of time. But it's the same solution. It's this like personal connection that lets the player tell the GM, oh wait, I'm looking at my sheet. I go talk to Silver. She knows things about this.
Yeah, I just want to point out, I did not create that idea. I stole it from someone, but I don't remember who.
It's an old idea in gaming, honestly. Like I think the first time probably Pendragon was the first game that I played that had that.
Yeah, I don't remember offhand who I had seen someone use it. Or someone had described it, or I had seen someone use it. I don't remember. It was a long time ago, and I'm just like, this seems like the best solution to this, you know, to this particular problem. And we tried it, and it worked out really well. And like that guy Swarthy, like it, you know, those are just small people, but it's like they turn out to be like, because eventually at any point in a campaign you will need NPCs that you can threaten, NPCs that you can put in danger to make the players kind of care about, you know, to buy into certain situations.
Well, yeah.
And you have these people sort of pre-baked. You know, they're already there.
I mean, that's all I do. If we want to get back to this like DM philosophy thing, in lieu of story prep, I make characters. I make NPCs, or they're already there in the setting. And when at the table when we're playing, what I do as the GM is they play their characters and I play the NPCs, and that's the game pretty much. So I just happen to know that the inspector is looking into these murders that they were involved in, and I happen to know that he's not getting anywhere with that, and I happen to know that their contact on the police force is, you know, trying to get out of his job ahead of being prosecuted, and he kind of wants to work for their gang, and he's trying to make overtures to do that. And I know that the crime boss who runs the current ward is afraid of the ghost of the previous boss that she murdered, and she's desperate. Blah 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 blah. I don't have any. There's no story, but as soon as the characters do something, as soon as they look into the death of the former crime boss, we can play, because I just play Alyssa, and maybe not on screen necessarily if she's not there, but I can just play her and be like, oh, okay, I'm Alyssa. This is what she would do. Like, she doesn't want anyone to find out about Rorik's ghost, so what would she do? Well, she has a bunch of dudes, a bunch of killers, so she sends the killers to murder the PCs, because that's what she would do. And so the scene that happens at the table is they go, let's get to the bottom of Rorik's ghost. And I say, who do you talk to? And they say, I have a friend who's a occultist. We talk to the occultist, da-da-da-da-da. And then on their way home back to their lair, a bunch of killers show up to murder them. And that's not because there's a story about that. It's because I just played Lissa. Like, I just played that NPC. Yeah. And I'm like, well... And sometimes when you play the NPC, you go, wow, she really wants to murder them. She has no way of doing that at all. What do you do when you want to murder someone and you can't? You talk to your friend who nose guys, and it's just this whole process of
I
playing a character.
I do this funny thing. The I don't know if other DMs do it. It may just be me because I'm an idiot. But I very rarely prep on paper. But a lot of times when I need to come up with a cool scene, like when I need, like when a campaign is coming to a climax or like they're about to face a big villain, what I do is the first thing I do when I'm trying to figure out this villain after I build their stat block and I've created them and I've put them on the board. That's all the mechanical stuff. That's easy. What I need to do is I need to find a voice. I need to figure out what this character sounds like. And then
yeah.
I'll just probably, usually when I'm driving like to or from work or something like that, like I'll just start running through like what I think this character's monologue is gonna sound like in my head. And like that's somehow when I do that, that's just where a lot of ideas come from. Like because
Me too,
like
totally.
I was doing a thing. One of my players has in Crimson Throne literally turned into a vampire. They were fighting vampires. He found a heart for the vampire ritual, and he's a barbarian. He just bit into it, fully knowing that this would fuck him up. But he wanted that power because he's technically a lawful evil barbarian.
Nice.
And so he's been succumbing to this, and I didn't even know, like, I'm like, what am I gonna, I don't know exactly what I'm gonna do with this, because I had set up the vampires and I knew what I was gonna do with them plot wise, but I had not planned for that. And so I was like, one of my characters has already had an enemy come to him in a dream because that character got branded with a handprint that caused him to be like psychically connected to this enemy. I was like, oh, do I want to do the dream thing again? And then I realized, I was like, yeah, but these vampires, like, it's been set up in the story that they do come, like the woman will come to her child in mist form and stuff. And so I just started monologue, like running through this dream scene in my head, and I don't know where it came from, but I just like had her say like, all you've ever wanted is a family. And I realized, like, this dude's a gangster, like, he has no family, he barely has any friends, and I'm like, in my head, I'm just like, oh, that's fucking brilliant. And then, like, so I dropped that in the game, and, like, everyone is flipping out. Like, the players are like, oh, it's that vampire chick we heard about. And this guy, who is normally, like, this kind of violence-prone barbarian dude, is just, like, stunned there for a second, like, I have no idea how I'm gonna react to this, and like that's my prep. Is I just start talking to myself, and hopefully hopefully something interesting comes out, because if not, then I'll just make something up on the spot and usually have to scramble after the fact to make it work.
Which is also good. Like that's a perfectly good technique, is to like just do something and then the players are like, why did that happen? You're like, oh, it's mysterious, right? And then but you have a week to figure out why that happened.
Yeah.
Right?
Well, not me, because I very rarely get a chance to do anything like until the day before the session.
Well, yeah, that's true too. But this thing you're talking about, to me, makes perfect sense, and it shouldn't be a novelty. In a way, we shouldn't even mention this as a DM technique, because what you're doing is role playing.
Yeah.
And that's the hobby. But somewhere along the line, GMs were instructed to be sort of directors or managers of the game. It's your job to like make the pacing work out just right and plan out the story and do these sort of directorial jobs. And again, some people are very good at that, and it's fun and it's fine. I'm not shitting on that, but sitting in your car on your commute and role playing your NPC to think about what she wants and what she's going to say, why isn't that just what GMing is? It's like you're a role player, your players are role players, you all show up at a table together and you role play together. The core of the hobby is playing characters, and the directorial aspects of GMing can be dialed way up or way down according to your taste, but it doesn't have to default to way up, in my opinion. I think it's totally fine to be a role player with your players, role play the NPCs, pursue the NPCs' interests according to their means, and that will conflict with your players' interests and their means, and there will be conflicts, and you'll have
I
drama
I do have a
that comes out of that.
I do have a question for you, and this is only because generally the way I write when I write a campaign, I think this will probably be the last question we'll try and tackle here, is when I write a plot thread, only because I know my style tends to be to write a bunch of plot threads that are running simultaneously, and then the player, like, I will let the players kind of work to sort them out. So, but
Yeah.
like at the beginning, I always like to have two simultaneous plots like overlapping, so like one will end like in the middle of another one, and then that will keep going, and a new one will pick up. So there's always two plots going on at the same time.
Mhm.
But and then the players will start and they think like, "Oh, this shit's interconnected," but then they'll realize that it's actually not. It's like this connects here and this connects here, and they can sort it out on their own. But
Yeah.
oh, I guess. Oh no, someone's saying they're having trouble stream, but that doesn't seem to be an issue. So what I want to know is, when you're sort of kind of figuring these things out, do you get into like writing a plot such that the players will advance a little bit, like they'll pick up a clue and then they'll learn the next bit that they'll learn the next thing that they got to do to solve the problem, whatever, and then just like
No.
and just stop that for a little bit and not like progress that plot for a while because other things are going on, or it just doesn't make sense to continue it right now?
Um. Yeah. Well, yeah, kind of. It depends on the game we're playing. Um, if we're playing if we're playing Blades in the Dark, there's a system for that, and so I use the game system to figure that out.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so that's a bit of a cop out. Like, yeah, I play my game and it's great. But if I was running like, let's think of another game. Well, if I was running Stars Without Number, I ran 70 sessions of Stars Without Number, big, huge campaign. And it doesn't I mean, it has a faction system where the NPC factions battle each other behind the scenes to create a dynamic sandbox, but it doesn't have a system for like this faction coming after the PCs in whatever. Like the GM manages all that stuff. So yeah, so I guess for me it's this two sides of this coin we're talking about, where I don't have a plot, so there's not a thing they need to do the next thing, because it's not a temporal sequence. It's a sandbox. So there's a bunch of factions doing things and conflicting, and the PCs are in that maelstrom, and they're trying to do a thing. And that thing the PCs are trying to do, there are 4 NPCs that also want that. So they're naturally tending to be allies, and there are 8 NPCs that must stop that from occurring, and so they're naturally enemies. And then there's everyone else, and one of their allies is also an ally with their enemy, and any given week, the PCs might be like, well, we're not going to do that. We're not smuggling shit to IO this week, because we found out that that's insane, because there are 8 factions that are going to murder us if we try to do that. So we're not going to do it because we're not dumb. So we dump all our cargo off for 10% of its value, and we go take a job off the job board. What is available? Oh, that? Okay, we'll do that. So it's this completely dynamic thing, and I don't need them. If they discover a mystery, there are 11 other things to do in my sandbox. So if they discover that mystery and they don't know where to go next, that's not my problem. They're stuck on that mystery. They don't know what to do. They don't do anything to get the answer. And so I just go, you don't know. What do you do now? And they go, my answer is the world is way bigger than a plot. So if there's no dead ends, if they get to a point where they're stuck, then they're just stuck, and I don't care that they're stuck. That's not my problem as the GM. I just look at them blankly and go, you don't know what to do about this. And so they either solve the problem or they go do something else. But in a plot-based game, there's a plot, and there isn't anything outside the plot. If they leave and go somewhere else, then you're fucked. in the sandbox model, they just go do something else, and the game continues on. So you don't. There's no roadblock or like I need to make sure they find out that this guy's the traitor. You don't have to do any of that. They don't find out he's the traitor, and then 6 weeks later they find out that that planet, the coup was a success, and the military took over, and they're like, shit, we didn't find it out. Oh well, like, and that just happens. It's not that they're going to find the traitor and then they're going to have the fight where they stop him and then they're going to join the rebellion, and that's not how it works. It's just completely freeform chaos. Yeah. No, I can hear you. Oh, of course I can.
Are we back? Yeah, we're back. No, sorry guys, it was just my mic. It sometimes crashes. I don't really have much control of it. But yeah, it's so like they at one point my players learned that they had done a bunch of jobs that were all technically in service of this big shady guy, criminal that they don't know the name of or the motives of in the background. They had played into his hand perfectly. Um, and and then they're like, "Fuck, we need to do something about this." But there's nothing they can do because they have no leads. They have no way of figuring out, like, even if they looked into it, it was, this guy is positioned in such a way that nothing they did actually links back to him, except for the fact that he sent them a note saying, like, "Thank you for working for me. By the way, don't bother. You won't find me. If I need you in the future, I'll use you again." Like, that's he played, but the reason that they can't get back to that is because it doesn't, because I don't need that to be front and center in the universe right now. It would take too much attention away from other things, so it fades into the background until I need that detail, like that setting detail again in the future,
Right.
and then it will come forward again.
Right. And so this right again. This is the dichotomy. Like, you in this model, the GM decides what's important and what's on the foreground, and in the other model, the players do. And they're very incompatible models. It's possible to bridge the gap, but people have spent way too much ink trying to bridge that gap. I think it's much better to just set expectations up front and say, "Hey, players, you're going to decide how this campaign goes, and I'm going to sit back and watch and have a good time watching all your exploits." Or, "Hey, players, I have a campaign about how this star sector, turns out, and you're going to play through it." And just don't cross the streams. In my opinion,
I get
it's
you.
just too much trouble to try to, or do the old, like, Robin Laws wrote a hilarious book. Sorry, Robin, I love you, but he wrote this terrible book that basically is like, here's how you spin all the plates to satisfy the player who wants story and the player who wants freedom, and make it all work out perfectly. And, like, don't do that.
Yeah.
I think that's a huge waste of time as a GM.
Yeah, I had a conversation not about that in particular, but on Twitter earlier, DM Leviathan, a friend of mine on Twitter, he basically he had a little bit of a rant that basically boiled down to, like, when you're doing a really dramatic speech or something, or you're in the campaign and you're up against the final boss, and, like, he's monologuing, and it's real dramatic, or there's a monster that's lumbering towards you about to destroy the city, or the DM has worked to build up this moment, and then the player, like, he makes a fart joke, like, don't, like, that, it's not like, he said, like, that's not cool, like, don't do that, because and which is fine, like, I understand there's a lot of ideas on the subject. Mine is generally,
Sure.
like, if the DM is trying to create drama and tension and the player is trying to fuck around, those two people are not going to have this fun at the same time. It's better to
Totally
it's
agree.
better to just not play.
I completely agree with that. I think there are exceptions to that, where, social pressures of various sorts make it so that's not the case. But yes, in general, um, long time ago, Ron Edwards had a really good analogy about gaming, which was playing in a band. If you want to start a band, initially when you're 12, you play with your friends.
Yeah.
Because like 6 people, and you're like, let's have a band, and you play together, and it's terrible.
Yeah.
And one guy wants to be heavy metal, and one guy wants to be prog rock or whatever, and everyone hates it, and it sucks. And then you grow up and you become an adult, and you know hundreds and hundreds of people, and when it's time to form a band, you don't just take whoever shows up at random with whatever ideas about music that they have and go, let's have a band, this will be great, it'll totally work out. We're all just going to magically make a cool new sound together. What an insane idea. No one would ever do that. But gamers, for whatever reason, there's a very pernicious idea in gaming that you should just fucking play with. We're all role players, right? We're just going to play together. It'll be fine.
And again, we talked about this before stream. That's how it was back before online gaming was the thing.
Yeah.
You only had the people that you had access to. I
mean, we're not to the point, at least not yet, where you like audition people the way you would with a band.
I do. I don't know about on Roll20. I certainly do.
I was gonna say, effectively, you can now, because you can go watch their stream and be like, I'm not playing with that guy. That's crazy.
Oh no, that was before I was even streaming. Like because I knew what I wanted out of a game, and I wanted players who wanted to play the game that I wanted to deliver. I don't want players who want to play something that I'm not interested in delivering. And
honestly, this is the answer to every gaming question. Go to RPGNet, and there are thousands of posts saying, "How can I get my players to the? How can I get this? How can?" The answer to all of those questions is, be very careful who you game with, be on the same page, and then, what do you know? None of those problems ever arise. Everything is smooth.
I've done a few hundred, I think, DM Q&As, and almost my general advice, because I do this all the time on people's streams, like DM's Tavern, and we talk about whatever. And one of my biggest pieces of advice is almost every I'd say 90% of the questions that you get from new DMs and from people is, I have a player who wants this, or my players are doing this, and I was like, almost all those questions can be answered by simply saying, talk to them, communicate.
Yes. Yes.
There are a few things that cannot be solved by having a normal communication, but you will find that will solve most every problem. And sometimes when you have that communication, the answer that you will arrive at is, maybe this is not the right game for you. Maybe this is not the right group for you, whether as a DM or the player. And there's nothing wrong with that. A lot of people feel like that's a personal insult, or a slight.
I know.
Like, I'm not right for this game. What are you talking about? But it's like, it's just, it happens. Like, it's a
well, there's
fact.
also this expectation, like, preference is not everything, right? Like, we tend to live in this weird space, particularly on the internet. Like, I like Doctor Who, and I hate Pokemon, or whatever. Like, we have these weird, silos that you have to fall into. And for the most part, people just aren't like that. Like, my friend doesn't want to play Burning Wheel. She hates it. She thinks it's the dumbest game. It drives her insane. She just has no interest in it whatsoever. The other 3 people in our game group really want to play it. And so we go, look, we love playing with you, but we really want to play Burning Wheel. What do we do?
Yeah.
And she goes, well, I mean, just play it for 3 or 4 weeks, and I'll just sit out and do something else for that time. And that's fine. But then we play it 3 or 4 weeks, and we go, yeah, so our game is really awesome, and we want to keep playing it. So should we switch nights or what? And she's like, fuck it, fine, I will play your stupid Burning Wheel game. And we're like, well, hang on, we don't want you to play. We don't want you to play and hate it.
Don't never play a game against your better judgment.
We're like, no, don't do that, don't do that. And she's like, no, fuck you, I'm gonna do it, and I'm gonna be the best Burning Wheel player of all ever. Shut up. And we're like, okay, fine. So it's all back and forth. And then she was amazing, and it was great. But that's just that's adult relationships, right? It's not this weird dogmatism where, like, I I don't like rock music, or I don't go to the opera. That's stupid. Like, dude, if your friend wants to go to the opera, go and see what you think. Like, don't be a dick about it. And it things don't have to be so dire and so
Yeah.
intense in that way. And after all of that amicability, then we can make decisions.
Yeah.
Then we can be like, listen, I know you're running Burning Wheel, but I gotta tell you, I don't want to play it. I tried it that one time, I didn't like it, so I'm out. And that's fine. It's fine. It doesn't hurt anyone's feelings. It's fine.
I feel like that's probably a good note to start wrapping things up, because we are at
Yes.
10 o'clock, and
Yes.
I know people gotta go do things, eat dinner. I kind of want to eat dinner. I know everyone else does too. So before we bounce out of here, I want to first say thank you to everyone who's been hanging out with us, everyone who's been watching, everyone who's been asking questions and hitting that follow button. If you haven't already, please hit that follow button. If you like the show, just click it. It's the best way to keep in touch with everything that's going on here on the Exploding Dice channel. I do have some announcements I want to get through, and actually, you know what? I'll do this. We'll do this before, and then we'll go to the plugs. So announcements. I very, very rarely. Thank you so much, Squeegee44, for following. I very rarely announce my schedule beforehand, only because things get crazy and things sometimes have to be rescheduled. But I'm so excited about my next month of programming for you guys that I need to share it. It's too good. So if you guys liked this show, let me open up my calendar. If you liked hanging out with John and talking RPGs with me, you're absolutely gonna love next week, because on the 26th on the Fuzzy Dice Show, I'm going to be hosting the DM himself, Matthew Mercer from Critical Role. He's gonna be here on my show. I still don't know why or how, but he is. So if you guys are into that, if you guys are a fan of his show, or you just want to come and see me talk to someone who probably knows a lot more about DMing than I do, and if you have questions you'd like to ask, that will definitely be the place for you. I will be tweeting stuff about that in over the next day or so. So that is the 26th. After that, I'm going to be hanging out with Mr. James Intricasso. He is a game designer, a writer. He's done all kinds of stuff. He's a great guy, and he'll be hanging out with me on the 2nd. The 9th, I had to reschedule it. It was on the 12th, but on the 9th, I'm hanging out with Mr. Mike Shea from Sly Flourish blog. He's got a new book coming out called Fantastic Locations, and also the author of The Lazy Dungeon Master, and he'll be hanging out with me on August 9th, followed by the D20 Babes, with Mr. Curtis Webb. He's going to be here. The 23rd, I have got the cast of the new the Gamers series. If you love the Gamers movies, you're gonna want to be there. And then I've got the gay guy himself, Guy from the Bacon Battalion, also known on YouTube as the Great Dungeon or Game Master series. He's an awesome dude, and he will be hanging out with me. And I've got a few things after that that are still up in the air, but great programming for you guys. I hope you will enjoy it. And also, we have a brand new show coming this Sunday, so definitely check that out. I've got a new cast, entertainers and voice actors, great people, all of them, so you definitely don't want to miss that. The schedule for everything is down on that side. You can check it out. You can also hit me up on Twitter. It's at Askren. You can see it right here. And all the schedule stuff is going to be there. So, John, thank you so much for hanging out with me. Why don't you go ahead and do any hooks, any plugs, tell people who you are, where they can find you on the internet, and what they can look forward to from you in the future.
Sure, man. Yeah, thanks for this. This was super fun. This is a great show, and everyone should follow. And Twitch is stupid, and you can't subscribe to people initially, which is dumb, in my opinion.
You gotta get partnered, man. Gotta do it.
Maybe Askren has a PayPal or something. You can send him $5. I don't know how you do it, but it's a great show, and you support it. It's awesome. Thanks for having me on. It was really fun. This is one of my favorite things to talk about, and you are a great conversation partner in this space, and really look forward to your talk with Matt Mercer, because he and I are as opposite a GM as you could possibly imagine, and I think he's awesome. I love
Yeah.
him.
I
Yeah.
look forward so much to asking him what's behind his DM screen.
Yeah. We do not run games in the same way in any way at all, and I think he's great. He's fantastic. So I'm really looking forward to that as a new fan of the show. That's going to be fun. You can
Awesome,
follow
man.
me on Twitter. John_Harper is my Twitter.
It's right below your face. It says it right there.
It's right there. And OneSevenDesign.com is my website. All my free games are there if you want to play some free games. I have a Patreon. You can find me on Patreon. There's a couple games, exclusive Patreon games there if you want to pick those up. And Blades in the Dark is my current project. It's on DriveThruRPG if you want to go grab it. There's a early access model in the vein of Steam games right now. If you go get the PDF on DriveThru, you get all future updates of the game forever, including all the final products and art and maps and everything. So that's available as well.
That's awesome, man.
And, yeah, thanks again. This was super fun.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for hanging out. It was great. I hope you had a good time. I hope everyone in chat had a good time. Thank you to everyone who followed, everyone who's been hanging out. If you guys do like the show and you're interested in supporting it, you can always hook me up with a buck or two on Patreon. It's just patreon.com/explodingdice. I very rarely push it. In fact, I only started last week. But if you like the content and you want to see more, that's the best way of helping see more. I know you gotta beg these days. It feels
No,
weird.
it's not begging. Look, the creative work is hard. It takes time. It takes money. You guys like this content? Giving $1 or $2 is how you get more of it. We live in a free internet society. I give away a lot of my games for free. But if you want to see more content like this, you gotta pay with your wallet. That's the way the world works today. So
Yeah.
Patreon is the best, and go do Patreon. It's awesome. Support this channel with your dollars. That's how it's done.
As always, thank you so much, everyone. I hope to see you next week. Big thanks to all of you guys. Big thanks to John. And as always, do not let Dice Thulu get his tentacles on you, because he does get kind of handsy. You know what happens. But I will see you guys next week. Have a great night. Take care, guys.